Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Today on CityCast DC, there hasn't even been a vote on a new Washington Commanders stadium in DC, but a lot of folks already talk about it as if it's a done deal. But not J.C. Bradbury. An economics professor, Bradbury is an expert on the economics of stadiums, and he definitely has a point of view. He thinks they're rotten and almost never worth it. Bradbury is here to walk us through his research and what he thinks it ought to mean for DC's looming decisions about RFK. Today is Monday, April 14th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, JC.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
I'm good. So you are an economist, and you've studied whether or not stadiums are ultimately smart public investments for cities. My sense is you're not very mitigated about that. What's the gist of your findings?
Right. And, I'm not alone in that, and that economists really have looked into the idea that stadiums are economic catalyst or have lots of community benefits. And we've been doing so for about 50 years. And consistently, we find that there are very limited economic benefits from stadiums. It's not that people don't enjoy going to the stadium or having teams around. It's just there's not much justification for using public money to fund these things just because of the limited benefits that they produce to the community.
Are there any exceptions?
So I'm not aware of any exceptions. And I often ask people, say, can you give me an example of a stadium that has been successful? And they'll point to, let's take a look at San Diego in the Gaslamp District, which is, I agree, is a great place to go and visit. And Petco Park is one of my favorite stadiums. But the area there isn't there because of the stadium. And if you go and walk around the area, you'll see that it's actually nicer the further away you get from it. These things are happening together, so it's a confusion of correlation and causation. The Lodo District in Denver, which again is another fantastic area to visit that I love going to, but people don't understand that the Lodo redevelopment happened before Coors Field was ever even, proposed. So these things are connected to stadiums, but in general, when economists go and break down, hey, how did property values change around stadiums after it opened? Or how did tax revenues change with it after it opened? How did sales tax collections change? And we tend to find that there doesn't seem to be any large economic impact, certainly one that doesn't justify the level of subsidies, which you're looking at. New stadiums coming online are getting around $500 million in subsidies, and there's nothing close to the benefits that are generated by stadiums that would justify taxpayers ponying up that amount of money.
So we're at the beginning of a stadium debate in Washington, although sometimes it feels like the cake's already cooked, and people are making a lot of arguments that I think will probably be quite familiar to you about the economic benefits of building them, about what it'll do for neighborhoods that aren't that sexy right now. Let me just go through them a little bit, if that's okay
Sure.
with you. One of the arguments is the construction will create jobs, increase foot traffic, supports businesses in the area, et cetera. Have you found anything to support that?
So there's almost nothing to support that. I mean, that's one thing where there's really no economist who argue that, no, there are a lot of economic benefits particularly from construction, because largely people who work building the stadium will otherwise be building other things. And so it's just really a transfer of employment from one job to another. When you talk about sort of the economic development benefits around the stadium, largely the spending that happens at sporting events is locals. And so, the reason why people cheer for whether it be the Washington Commanders or Washington Nationals are people who live in the area. And so if they weren't spending their money at the venue, they would be spending it elsewhere in the community. So we don't tend to see large economic benefits. And even if you want to look at sort of reinvigorating an area, saying, hey, we need to redevelop this and turn a sad area into a nicer area, what we find is that the stadiums themselves actually have very little positive impact on that, and in fact have many detrimental effects, because stadiums events often bring a lot of people into the area, which disrupts certain types of businesses like stores, doctors' offices, as well as creates crime in the area, and that can actually harm the area. So there's no clear evidence of any development catalyst activity happening when stadiums open.
So what about this idea that, like in Washington, where the baseball team plays, Nats Park, that was at the time of the stadium being built, not much going on in that area that would draw you from someplace else. And there is quite a bit now, and maybe it would have happened anyway. But the argument was you go to a ball game, afterwards you go out for a beer, you've parked your car someplace, maybe you stop in a store on your way back to your car, wherever it was parked. These people who come in, particularly in a divided area like DC, maybe they come from Virginia, so they're spending their money in DC instead of Virginia. Is there anything to that argument?
So we don't tend to see that. I mean, sort of the conjecture is there that you put a stadium in there, if you build it, they will come.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you want to look at the Nationals area, the area sort of around the Naval Yard there where the Nationals Park is often cited as credited as, oh, this is what caused this. But really, there was some redevelopment that was taking place before that happened, and the ballpark came along with that. And so it's kind of one of those things where just because things are happening together doesn't mean one thing causes the other. And one of the things that I try and do as an economist and other economists have done is use specialized empirical methods that allow us to single out, hey, maybe there's something else happening because DC has resurged quite a bit throughout the city. I used to live in the city and in the suburbs, and the area's improved a lot, just like areas around Atlanta have improved a lot where I live now. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. So Atlanta Braves used to play at Turner Field in downtown Atlanta. And people said, oh, it's going to revitalize the area. Well, if you want to go to that area today where Turner Field is still there and the building is still there, the area is much nicer than it used to be. And that is because that it no longer suffers from the disruption of having a baseball game. Now you have grocery stores, you have lots of bars and restaurants, lots of apartments and places people are living, and they actually lost a team. And so it's quite common to see this, and that's why we often say, hey, you can't just look at before and after comparisons and say this caused that. We need to look at the many different factors, and when you control for all those factors, it seems that stadiums play a very small role and sometimes a negative role in the development of those areas.
All right, and plenty of places in DC and presumably in lots of other cities revived without a stadium. Like there's no stadium on U Street and it's a pretty vibrant area.
I think one of the things that people don't understand is that there seems to like we have some formula that can develop things and we can turn an unprosperous area into a prosperous area. And a stadium is kind of a neat focal point to say, hey, we can get the stadium to anchor this development. But the reality is that we don't often understand why some areas take off and some don't. And we hear a lot about mixed-use developments being designed. Some of them take off, some of them don't. And the reality is that we don't really have a plan, and you kind of just sort of have to let those things happen. Are you providing the proper infrastructure? Are you providing the services that are needed for an area developed? Those things are much more important than saying design a central design strategy that's going to work out.
Wait, and I think you're also saying that, like, let's say there wasn't even a football team or a baseball team. It's not like people would then take their money and just keep it in the bank. They would go spend it on, going to the movies or a play or something.
Right, absolutely. And so we see this all the time when teams leave communities, is that we don't see these towns becoming, not places where corporations don't want to locate or people don't want to live. Take example of Montreal after losing the Expos, which moved to DC. Montreal is still a wonderful city that people love to visit with lots of great things to see and do. Los Angeles didn't somehow become, a backwater when it lost its NFL teams for 20 years. The NFL finally realized we made a huge mistake. We got to go back. And I think people get the causation backwards, and that teams want to be where the people are. They want to be in those areas. And so one of the reasons why the NFL might want to move back to DC is they feel it's more convenient for its fans and can help its bottom line. It has very little to do with revitalizing the community.
Are you ready to add a little je ne sais quoi to your spring? The Alliance Française of Washington, D.C. is here to help you embrace all things French. The Alliance Française of Washington, D.C. offers language courses tailored to every level. Late spring sessions start on May 3rd. So if you've ever dreamed of ordering your morning café in perfect French or discussing art and history with ease, now's your chance. But it's not just about the language courses. A membership with the Alliance Française of Washington, D.C. brings you into a vibrant community that celebrates all things French. You get exclusive access to cultural events, wine tastings, film screenings, and more. Visit www.francedc.org to start your journey.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, those goals often fade. That may have happened to you. It has definitely happened to me. And that's where Prolon comes in. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed, structured approach to stay on track and see real results. And now Prolon is upping their game with the new next-gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. I've been doing the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. I really enjoy the tasty energy bars, the snacks and soups, and the fact that I can enjoy meals, even though the calorie count is super low. The flavors and textures are excellent. An olive oil snack here, broccoli and quinoa soup there, hibiscus tea, a yummy nut bar. It's got the benefits of a 5-day fast, but doesn't have the challenge of doing it with pure liquids. It's a system reset. And also, I know this sounds funny, but it's not. The packaging and directions are fantastic, clear, and well-organized and thoughtful. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering CityCast listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/city. That's PROLONLIFE.com/city to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/city.
So you and your colleagues have been releasing research like this for decades. Has it done anything to move the conversation on whether stadiums are a good public investment?
I really wish I could say yes, but the reality is that we've sort of gotten in this rut where everyone just considers, well, we've always funded stadiums like this, so we should keep funding it. And basically because these stadium debates happen sort of once every 30 years. It is a stadium wears out, we need a new stadium. And it's like we forget at what happened during the last debate. And so you see these debates come up and the same arguments happen over again. And you point out, well, the last stadium didn't work out. And they always have an answer. And it is, oh, don't worry, this one will be different. This one will be different, we promise. And so in the 1960s and 70s, when we were building these big cookie cutter stadiums like RFK, everyone said, oh, well, look, we've got a new suburban model. We'll have lots of parking. Everyone's going to want to come to this stadium. And it's going to be multi-purpose. That didn't work. So then we developed Camden Yards. Oh, we're going to have an urban city stadium where people are going to travel to Cleveland and Baltimore and go to Jacobs Field, Camden Yards, and they're going to revitalize the city. And when we look at the economic evidence afterwards, that doesn't happen. Then sort of we have the next generation of stadiums, which is right down the street where I am right now in Cobb County, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, where the Truist Park is in Atlanta. We have a mixed-use development surrounding the stadium. But the reality is that when you look at the economic activity around the Battery and Truist Park, there may be some migration from other urban jurisdictions, but it's very small, and it certainly doesn't justify the $300 million in subsidies the county provided to build the stadium.
Can I ask a specific question about
Sure.
that? Because this is what is going to be proposed for the football stadium here. It's this new model where you're not just building a stadium, you're building a neighborhood. There's going to be housing, there's going to be hotels, there's going to be entertainment, there's going to be et cetera. And in Washington, where the cost of housing is really high, there's an acute awareness that there's great need for housing. So stadium is often presented as a thing that will, they can leverage in order to get a lot of housing. I've never understood why you can't just have the housing and the other stuff without the stadium. Is the stadium, just as an economic matter, as a luring investors matter, is it really essential to getting all that other stuff built if you've got like a blank space like RFK?
Right, absolutely. You can separate all those other things you want in the area. The stadium is not needed to anchor the development, and if anything, it's going to anchor it in the way that it's going to drag things down. Because stadiums don't just have sort of these. We think of these positive spillover benefits. I live near a stadium, and I'm going to go to a store afterwards or hang out in restaurants and bars. And we do find that there are some small benefits around the stadium that accrue to certain types of businesses, entertainment businesses, but I don't want to open up a grocery store next to a stadium. If I want to live in a neighborhood, I want a grocery nearby. So that deters people from living there. Mm-hmm. And so they're not very good development catalysts at all. And it's sort of a myth that they have been. It's not some net increase in economic activity to the area.
So in D.C., there's sort of two arguments simultaneously, and they often bleed into one another. One is, should there be public subsidies of any sort for a new stadium. The other is the more basic one: should there be a new stadium? Period. That there is this space around RFK, and maybe it should be developed in some completely other way where it's like almost all housing or whatever, something else. Your research is about public subsidies and whether they are a good idea. Do you have thoughts on the sort of, let's say there was a magical billionaire owner who was happy to build it themselves without a penny from the government? Does that change whether it's a good idea or not?
Well, it certainly can change it. The interesting thing about sports stadiums is that they clearly are not used as long as their lifespan is. And that is, we typically see stadiums which used to last 50 to 70 years, which is pretty typical when they first started opening in the early 20th century, and now are lasting 30 years or less. And so it's very interesting when you look at the Commander Stadium, which hasn't been open all that long, and suggest it hasn't lived its useful life. We see this a lot in professional stadium construction, largely because if someone else is going to help you build it, it makes some sense to just simply replace the stadium. So there's some sort of feeling, because this is an entertainment venue, that we need to just keep building new ones. And if a private company wants to do that, that's fine. When you don't have to foot the bill, you tend to just trade it in. If your lease is up, you just say, we're going to leave it.
But so in the old days, like when they built, I don't know, like Yankee Stadium, Fenway Park, all the legendary things, were those just built by the owner and the city or the state didn't help?
Yes, almost all the original Major League, those were all privately financed stadiums. And they kept them for a long time. And it was only when they started to wear out that they started looking at the public stadium model. They started looking at NFL teams playing in public stadiums, for example, in the LA Coliseum, which was built for the Olympics in the 1920s. And then so it sort of became considered a civic obligation, like garbage collection. And no one really thought to question, is this a good idea or not? And we kind of got stuck doing it.
So after 50 years of research from people like you, why do city councils and local governments keep feeling pressure to push stadiums through?
Well, it's very interesting that the demographics of people who tend to serve as elected representatives tend to be sort of well-educated males. And I know that that's not everyone, and I'm not trying to say that it is, but that's definitely a demographic that likes sports. And so when you take a look at stadium deals that get approved, there are two ways they can be approved. They can be approved by going to the general electorate, where there's a vote. We're going to have a referendum on it, and it goes up or down. When that happens, those pass around 50% of the time, maybe a little bit more than a majority. When you have it decided by a city council, county commission, state legislature, they pass about 95% of the time. And I think part of that is because the people who are deciding on this are some of the direct beneficiaries of the stadium negotiations. You get to, hear about the stadium deal over cocktails in the owner's box. You might, leave with a personalized jersey, and you might even get to shake someone's hand who was in the Hall of Fame. And you tend to see it's not partisan either. Both Democrats and Republicans tend to universally support stadiums, and I think a lot of it has to do with the perks that come along with seeking it. And plus, the people that associate with these people are heavily involved in local economic development, chambers of commerce. Those are the types of people who are buying the luxury boxes, getting season tickets in club seats,
Right.
and regularly using it. So you have this sort of insular group making these very political decisions, and everyone turns around and says, well, everyone I know supports the stadium. But what they don't realize is that a lot of people who can't even afford to go to the games really don't like the fact that it's coming out of their pockets, and that's why they often vote it down.
But there's another thing, and it's harder for you to study because you're an economist. You study dollars, you study markets, which is that part of the conversation about this, for better or worse, is about civic pride, the joy a community takes in its team, the fear that team might go someplace else. And as a result of that, a lot of people who don't go to games, can't afford to go to games, wind up championing this also. How do you, as an economist, price in, these sort of abstract things like civic pride and joy in a team?
It's kind of a myth, and maybe economists deserve this, that economists don't study these non-financial benefits of stadiums. And in fact, there's actually been a large amount of research done to try and estimate the value that people host on having a major league team. I mean, I'm not arguing that people don't value having a team. This funding of the Braves Stadium in my county was a bad public policy, but I enjoy having the Braves nearby. I mean, that benefits me personally. I just don't know that it's the proper role for government there. But let's take a look at what these studies show. When we go and we conduct these sort of specialized surveys that try and estimate how much people value them, when you tell them, would you be willing to pay $30 a year to have a team, or $20 a year? And normally it's a series of questions, and it's a lot more complicated than just your standard survey. They tend to express values that are far below what they're giving up in terms of subsidies. And so think about this. I would very much like to have a Ferrari. I mean, that to me, if you ask me, do you want a Ferrari? I'd say, of course I want a Ferrari. That'd be great. Well, when you pay for a Ferrari, you're going to have to move to a much smaller house. You can't go on vacation. You can't go out to eat. And I might say, whoa, hold on. I'd rather just have sort of the base model sedan than have a Ferrari. And the same thing is true with stadiums. When you ask people, would you like to have a team? They say, yes. Would you be willing to pay $50 a year to do this? They go, oh, no. In fact, when you look at how much people are willing to pay, it's typically about 20% of the cost of stadiums. No higher than 20%, I should say. It's often much less than that. So people really don't value living in communities with teams anywhere close to the value in subsidies they get. It's not saying they don't value it at all, but just the amount they evaluate is a lot less than people imagine that it is.
And I think the politics of like bonds, which is often how it's done, is also, it feels less direct, like for the next 30 years, we're going to be paying X, interest, et cetera. It's very different than saying like, all right, we're going to take this money that could have gone to the parks next year and take it to the stadium. It makes it feel less direct.
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot of part of the way these deals are presented is through a term that public finance economists like to call fiscal illusion. That is, the funding is sometimes presented in ways that makes it appear more palatable. So, for example, the National Stadium, as it was funded, they said, oh, we're just taxing local businesses so that it's paying for itself. It's like, well, when you buy from a local business, you're paying some of the tax. All the local businesses pay the tax. That has nothing to do with the stadium. And I've talked to many people, including representatives of DC government, who have told me that the stadium pays for itself through this tax. I mean, and I think that even a lot of elected representatives don't understand it. And so, it's a stadium district, it pays for itself. Well, the stadium district might be several miles larger than the stadium, and a lot of businesses that have nothing to do with the stadium end up paying for it. And so that's one of the reasons that helps promote these approval of these ventures, because people don't understand the cost.
Well, let me ask one last question. This is sort of a politics question, which is a lot of these teams are owned by billionaires. I guess all of these teams are owned by billionaires. So they are the primary economic beneficiaries of a stadium. The politics of billionaires is a little bit weird right now. We have had, moments of tremendous backlash against elite. We've also got a lot of incredibly wealthy people in and around the new president. Has this sort of, criticizing billionaires for wanting our stuff been part of the politics against stadiums, and has it been effective?
I would say yes. I think that deep down, most people don't believe that stadiums themselves really have large economic benefits. And they are immediately skeptical when you say, we're going to take some tax dollars and we're going to give it to this person who's already wealthy, and they're going to help make you wealthy. And I think that people are immediately skeptical when you say, I'm going to take this money from someone who is, from the average taxpayer, and give it to someone who is fabulously wealthy. And in Washington, D.C., that was clearly what was pushing the move to Alexandria for what was proposed for the Washington basketball teams, as well as the hockey team. And that you had a fabulously wealthy owner who was going to be moving the team to Virginia, and that's where a lot of the opposition in the Virginia legislature was. We shouldn't be giving this money to someone who was already wealthy.
So the Commanders famously are suddenly good again. Does it help sell these things when the team is in a good place?
I mean, I don't think it hurts the argument, but I mean, the Chiefs won the Super Bowl and have been one of the best football teams in the country, and they can't get a new stadium approved. And, you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, one of the absolute bottom of the barrel football franchises, getting $750 million to a billionaire who actually is in the news for taking his $400 million yacht to the Super Bowl. I mean, it really just a lot depends on local politics. And it's something that's very hard to study. How successful is your team, and do you get the subsidies? Because for the most part, when teams ask, they get the subsidies regardless of how well their team's doing.
JC, thank you for being here.
Sure. Well, happy to talk with you. Enjoyed it.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, send it to a friend who really wants a new stadium in DC, and then tell us what they think. We know there's a whole bunch of views on this issue. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.